What's going on, everyone? My name is Under the Radar, and welcome back to a video that I'm really excited to make because, one, I think that nobody's really made this type of video before that I've seen, and if they have, please link it to me because I'm curious to know what other people think about this. But I'm going to be talking about Dynamax and Gigantamax in Draft League format, because I do think there is a place for this, and I do think that there is a way to do it properly. So real quick, to go over what these two things are, what the difference between the two is, what the difference between the two are. Sure, we'll go with that. So Dynamax, any Pokemon can do, right? Any Pokemon in the format can Dynamax. That's a little scary, especially whenever you consider that Dynamaxing isn't like a one-time move like Z moves were. Dynamaxing is 3 turns of a really powerful Z move that also has a secondary effect. So, because of that, Dynamaxing is really terrifying. Gigantamaxing is the exact same thing. Also, with both of these, your HP gets doubled if you have maxed out Dynamax level. Because your level is maxed out and you get double HP, that makes you bulkier. None of your other stats change. None of them at all. So what that means is it makes certain Pokemon a lot bulkier, and it makes other Pokemon bulky enough to take multiple hits and set up because of the secondary effects of Dynamax Pokemon. Gigantamax Pokemon, they have a signature move that replaces the secondary effect. For example, let's take a look at, so the Max Fairy move, right? That's Dynamax. There we go. Max Starfall. This is a fairy type attack that a Dynamax Pokemon can use, and it sets up Misty Terrain for 5 turns. Okay, not that big of a deal, right? However, for Alchemy, for example, you have G-Max Finale, which basically is a fairy type attack, and it heals its HP while doing damage. So it doesn't set up Misty Terrain, it does damage, and it heals your HP. So this is kind of a big deal, right? Because that means that these Pokemon here can almost be treated similarly as a Mega Pokemon, in my opinion. So I don't think free Dynamaxing is a good idea, literally at all. I think it is a horrible idea. I think that is a way to ensure that your draft league will die, because people can draft things like Gyarados plus Charizard, and you have no idea what your opponent is going to do. Granted, common rocks weakness, whatever have you. With heavy duty boots, you're not worried about stealth rocks anymore. It can be very toxic for the metagame if you allow free Dynamax in general. I think, personally, if you allow Dynamax in general, it's really unhealthy for the league. And I don't think it should be allowed unless you come up with a system that is like, okay, we have the 5 tiers, right? Which is really hard to do with only 400 Pokemon. So, like, if you have, say, a setup of 5 tiers or 3 tiers, and everything that's not in those 3 tiers are the really low Pokemon, or if everything that is tier 4 and below can use a Dynamax, or you designate a tier 4 and below Pokemon to Dynamax, I think that could be all right, because typically those Pokemon are going to be absolutely terrible in this metagame, because with the 400 Pokemon, we're looking at tier 3s that are like regular Butterfree. We're looking at Pokemon like I'm trying to think of like we're looking at things like Cursula. You know, so things like Morgrim, the pre-evolution to Grimmsnarl. So we're looking at a lot of Pokemon like that aren't the best. So because of that, I really do think that that system for Dynamax could be alright, but I think that just a flat out, like, treating Gigantamax as your Mega slot might actually be a whole lot better. Because as you can see, we have a decent amount to allow everybody in a league to get one. Now, granted, some are not as good as others, and we all know that. Like, for example, GMAX Eevee is not as good as GMAX Butterfree. Butterfree will be phenomenal because it gets bulkier, it gets a G-Max move that can potentially put something to sleep, it gets Quiver Dance, it gets a bunch of really good moves. So it allows for different variants in how good something is. You can put prices on it to where you get some points back if you take a lower tier G-Max Pokemon. There's a lot of possibilities of this if you treat these G-Max Pokemon as megas. Now, I do kind of sort of want to go through each one of these and say, like, where I think they'd be ranked, if they'd be worse or better as Dynamax or Gigantamax, because I do think that is important. Let me do something real quick. Okay. I do think that that's a pretty important thing to think about. Like, for example, Gigantamax Charizard is good, but it doesn't set up the sun for itself. So we're just going to go through each one real quick and try to decide which one is better. And then that way, if you guys want to, you can kind of sort of use this as a guide if you do want to use this method in your leagues to be like, okay, Gmax Alchemy has a better move than Dynamax, so because of that, it should be a higher tier than, say, Corviknight, which has a worse move. You know? So that's just something to keep in mind. So we'll start off with Alchemy. I already said Fairy types. They set up Misty Terrain with their Fairy type Dynamax move. Whereas Alchemy, it does damage and heals you. That is phenomenal. Being able to set up a Calm Mind, an Acid Armor, recover, and then be able to attack and recover yourself at the same time makes this Pokemon absolutely phenomenal. So I definitely think that Gmax Alchemy is really, really good. Appleton is pretty good. However, its Gmax move is not as good as its Dynamax move if it was regular Appleton. Because Grass, what it does is it sets up grassy terrain. Whereas, I think it's Gmax... Oh man, what is it? Gmax Sweetness? Yes. And it heals the status condition of all allies. In Draft League, you don't have allies, so that doesn't really help you. So because of that, it is considered a worse Gigantamax Pokemon. It doesn't have much access to setup. It doesn't have much access to pretty much anything aside from being able to run like Ripen plus Citrus Berry to be able to have a pseudo 50% berry that we had last gen. So while it's not bad, it doesn't set up grassy terrain for itself, making its grass moves stronger. It also doesn't get the healing from grassy terrain that it would set up. So I think that Appleton is a little bit worse of a Gmax. Butterfree is really good. Gmax Flutterby, I think is what it's called. Or no, is it just called Max Flutterby? What's it called? Yeah, Max Flutterby. And it just lowers the target special attack stat. Not that big of a deal for Butterfree because it's really frail. More than likely it's going to die anyway. Or you're going to be setting up a Quiver Dance, which raises your special defense anyway. So I don't think that matters too much. Whereas its max move is Gmax Befuddle, which it guarantees status of something, whether it's Poison, Poison Sleep, or Paralyze. So that's really good. That means that this Pokemon, realistically, it can set up a Sleep Powder, right? However, if you go for Gmax Befuddle and you get a second Sleep, you just broke Sleep Clause and you lose the game. So it's really risky to use Gmax Befuddle. So that's something to keep in mind, but it's whatever. Centiskorch, I actually don't know what it does. I think it gets a Fire Centiferno. So it basically sets up Fire Spin. That's right. Because this, so Charizard and Centiskorch have pretty much the exact same thing. Sets up Fire Spin. It does a little bit of extra chip damage. This I don't think is as good because if you're G-maxing something, both of these Pokemon get access to really good setup in Coil and Dragon Dance respectively. So because of that, you're going to be one-shotting a lot of your opponent's team. Because of that, you don't really need to worry about doing extra damage to things if you're one-shotting them with your Gigantamax move. So I don't really think that that's as important, but I do think that it is pretty pretty interesting. So I don't think that these are like top tier. I don't think that these are top tier Gigantamax either. Colossal, I think it has a rock, right? Yeah, Volcalith. Exactly, same thing. Sets up like a Sand Tomb-esque feel, which I think is the same thing that Sandaconda does. So a lot of these, you don't get the boost, you damage your opponent in some other shape, way, or form, which sometimes isn't as good. The whole point of a Gmax is to set up. It's to become bulkier and do more damage. So these three in a row, they don't really do a whole lot, in my opinion. So they're not as good of Gigantamax forms. I think that these three specifically, this will probably stay UU. I think this will go to RU, and I think this will go to RU. This Gmax form right here, I think this is actually really good. So what Copperajah's Gmax move does is it sets up Steel-type Stealth Rocks. So let's say your opponent has an Ice type. No matter what it is, if you have Rocks plus Steel-type Stealth Rocks up, you're doing 50% damage upon entry. So I think that this is really good. While you don't get the defense boost, you can still power through teams, even with like Trick Room, with Webs Up, with Sheer Force. I think this could be really good. Not like top tier, but I don't think low tier like these three, or like these two. But I think like Charizard plus Copperajah could be like mid tier. Whereas Colossal, Scorch, and Appleton could be low tier. Corviknight, I think, is good. You don't get the speed boost, but you defog. That's really good. A lot of people value hazard removal in Draft League format. I personally don't. So, but I do see where it is good, and I do see where I would draft it. If I want something that's really good at getting rid of hazards, I would draft Gigantamax Corviknight. I would make sure that I'm fat enough to live multiple hits. I'd be able to set up bulk ups, and then I'd be able to go for some flying moves to get rid of hazards, along with break through my opponent's team. Dreadnought sets up Stealth Rocks instead of sets up Rain. This is give and take. If you have a Rain team, then you don't really need to have like the water type to set up the Rain. You can have this to guaranteed get up Stealth Rocks as you're sweeping with Swift Swim. So I think that this is actually better than if it were to just Gigantamax or to just Dynamax in League format. So I think this would also be mid tier. Duraludon, if I'm not mistaken, this, instead of lowering your opponent's special attack, man, I don't want to say it wrong. Steel Surge, no, it's a dragon. Depletion, that's right, it lowers the PP. It lowers the PP instead of, yep, lowering the target's attack stat. Again, it's really give or take. I could see where this could be mid-tier. Lowering a PP of like Recover, or lowering a PP of like Moonlight or Soft Boiled, or even Protect for that matter, could be pretty decent. So I think that this could also be low tier. As you can see, it is really bulky on the defensive side, but not on the SPDEF side. So if you have this thing and it can break through your opponent's team, because it does get access to really good coverage, I think it could actually be decent. So I think that this could be mid-tier. Eevee, low tier, and infatuates your opponent instead of lowering their speed. I don't really think that that's competitive. I think it would be absolutely low tier. It doesn't have the speed to be able to abuse adaptability. Doesn't have the attack to be able to abuse it. I don't think it's that good personally, but that's just my opinion. Flapple's Gmax, instead of setting up grassy terrain, it lowers your opponent's evasiveness. This, again, I think is also pretty mid-tier, because with Hustle, you would guaranteed hit. However, your max moves can't miss anyway. With Hustle, they still get the boost. And if you set up a Dragon Dance, you're at +1 with the Hustle boost, guaranteed not missing, 140 base power. You don't really need to worry about lowering your opponent's evasiveness whenever you're just one-shotting them anyway. The only time I would see this useful is if you're using like Gmax, I think it's Tartness, versus your opponent, and they go into like a steel type. You then lower that for whenever you come back as regular Flapple, and then you can hit them really hard. So this I could see being mid-tier, just because the bulk added on top of Dragon Dance is really good. But the Gmax move doesn't really help it at all. It's mainly the bulk. Garbodor, guaranteed poisons instead of lowers the defense, I believe. Right? Yep, guaranteed poisons instead of lowering, or it raises the special attack. So this I could see being either or. While it does have a pretty low special attack of 60, if you don't want to get burnt, like let's say your opponent has like a Milotic, a Runerigus, and something else that can spam Will-O-Wisp, right? Like a fire type. Like, Salazzle. That's a really good example. So like, let's say they have those 3 Pokemon, and you don't want to worry about being burnt and not killing anything. It could be decent because you can raise your special attack while still hitting pretty hard with like Sludge Bombs. Then gets access to Giga Drain, things like that. So low tier, but not like lowest tier. So like there's 2 mid tiers in my opinion for these things. I think it's like top tier with like 4, B, C, and D tier, similar to Megas. I think this would be in like C tier. This is give and take, right? So what Gengar's Gmax does is it traps you instead of, I believe, raising your attack, right? No, it lowers the target's defense stat. Basically the same thing. You're not hitting physically anyway, so this is better than a Dynamax in my opinion. So I think that this could be, seen in a couple different ways. But I do think that Gengar's Gmax is better. And I think that if you trap in something like a Rotom that can't kill you, but you can also take advantage of it by like guaranteeing the kill by making sure they can't switch out, it's pretty good. So I like this. I think that it's decent. I think it's mid-tier, but high mid-tiers, like B tier. Grimmsnarl, phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal Pokemon. What this does, instead of lowering the target's defense stat, it makes them drowsy. So, guaranteed, you are either killing something or you're making something go to sleep if they don't switch out. So you're either forcing your opponent to switch something and force 2 Pokemon minimum to take a max move, or you're putting something to sleep. Phenomenal ability. So because of that, I think this thing is like top tier, amazing, absolutely love it. Really good. Hatterene, not so good in my opinion. Instead of setting up Psychic Terrain, what it does is it confuses your opponent. I don't think that that's as good at all. You want Psychic Terrain to be able to hit harder, and confusing your opponent, it's like, you might make them not move, but they might also move. So it's kind of like a coin toss every turn, and I don't really like that. Kingler's hard for me. I really like it. I think it has a lot of potential. However, its water type attack, it lowers your opponent's speed by 2. And whereas if it wasn't Gmax, it'd be able to set up the rain. This gives viability to Kingler outside of agility, which is good because you can Dynamax, and instead of setting up an agility, just go straight for your water move, and that immediately allows you to be able to outspeed things. However, once your Dynamax or your Gigantamax is over, you're then like a slow Kingler again. So it depends. As a breaker, I think it could be pretty good because it gets access to like Superpower, Rock Slide, X-Scissor, Knockoff, Liquidation. Can be pretty strong, but in general, I think that this is kind of like mid-tier, either B or C tier. A little bit of both. Gmax Lapras, phenomenal, top tier Gmax Pokemon in my opinion. I think it is one of the best Gigantamax Pokemon. Guaranteed sets up Aurora Veil with its ice move instead of setting up hail. And on top of that, Light Clay does work with Gmax Resonance. So because of that, you can get a guaranteed 7 turns of Aurora Veil just by Gigantamaxing this Pokemon. Absolutely amazing. It is one-time use, but I think it does get access to regular Aurora Veil, right? Oh, it doesn't. Damn, that sucks. Oh well. I know a lot of Pokemon did get access to it this gen, but it wasn't one of them apparently. But with access to Water Absorb makes it a really good Scald switch in. Curse Body Press makes it able to beat down the vast majority of bulky waters out there since they no longer get toxic like Milotic and Vaporeon. Really good Pokemon. Love this Pokemon a lot. I think it's top tier along with some other Gigantamax forms. Machamp, absolutely low tier. one of the worst Gigantamax forms, because what it does is it raises your critical hit ratio instead of your attack stat. So it's basically like you have a chance to do 1.5 times damage instead of you have a guaranteed 1.5 times damage off. And Max Knuckle is one of those moves that is actually weaker than most regular moves like close combat, things like that. So it's not as strong as close combat, and you don't get the attack boost anymore. So because of that, I think Machamp is much worse. It does get really, really bulky, though. Like, that is one really good thing about it. So, meh. G-Max Meowth, I can't decide on yet, because it does get Fake Out. I think in doubles, it actually has a little bit of viability. In singles, I think it is trash, but super low tier. Orbeetle, mid tier, like C tier, maybe, because what it does is instead of setting up psychic terrain, it sets up gravity. So this ensures that your opponent is hit by sticky webs if you bring them, along with spikes and stealth rocks, or spikes and any other hazards, toxic spikes, whatever. It also makes your hypnosis a little bit more accurate, which is pretty good. So I think that this is like decent. It's not bad. It's bulky and it gets screens, so it would just be able to make it to where you can set up dual screens, you turn out, go into a Pokemon and try to sweep, and if you don't succeed in the sweep, you then bring this thing in, and then you can Gigantamax up, and you can get really bulky and try to break through your opponent's team. So I think it's like mid-tier, but it's whatever. Pikachu, I don't understand Pikachu, okay? Here's what I don't understand. Look at the special attack stat. Pikachu doesn't have that special attack stat. Right? Yeah. Oh, it does? What? I didn't think it was that weak. But the other thing I don't understand about this is, okay, so they updated it. On Showdown, it wasn't letting you put any moves on Gigantamax Pikachu. It was stupid. So, Gigantamax Pikachu with a Light Ball, I think is actually decent. It doesn't get access to Lightning Rod, but it does get access to Static. So with a Lightning Rod, you're essentially hitting pretty hard with a nice speed tier. So, and it does get access to, like, really good physical moves. Like, it gets access to Play Rough, it gets access to Facade, Brick Break, so it gets Fighting, Surf, Thunderbolt. I think it could be decent. On top of that, I think a Violite also works with this, meaning that it could be a decent pseudo check to some really offensive electric types that we have, like Manectric, Bolton, things like that. So I think it could actually be decent in that regard. So I don't think it's as bad as like Meowth and Eevee. So I think it's like C tier, which is pretty cool. If I'm wrong on the Violite thing, just let me know in the comments down below. I haven't tested it, but I was told that it did, and I believe who told me, so I like it. Sandaconda, I believe it just sets up yeah, Sandstorm. This could be decent. Here's why. So Shedskin is decent on a coil set. It's actually decently fast as well. But it's not as good as its regular because Max Ground raises your Spadef, and its lowest stat is Spadef aside from its special attack. But by setting up Sandstorm, you can chip down your opponent's team, you can have Rest, Coil with Shedskin, you can be really bulky with a really high HP stat and defense stat, and make your special defense not as bad. And on top of that, it can also be a really good last-ditch effort to set up Sandstorm if you have something like an Excadrill to be able to break through. And whenever Dracovich's hidden ability is out, along with Dracozolt, it can set up Sand for those Pokemon. So I think that this is actually like a B-tier Gigantamax form, and I think that it's really cool. Snorlax, really good, top tier, in my opinion. If you take this... God, this is stupid. By the way, if you ever want to know how much HP your opponent or your Gigantamax Pokemon is going to have, just do that, double it. It's going to have over 1,000 HP. That's stupid. That is dumb. It should never have that much HP at level 100. But with Curse, Recycle, and Gluttony, along with something like an Iapapa Berry, you're looking really good with like this set right here. If you can go Body Press for Steel type, since you're going to be boosting up your defense, and this Pokemon could just win you games. If you don't know what its regular max move does, so it's Replenish, I believe. Where is it? Gmax Replenish. It basically automatically restores your berries that you've eaten, which is really good because the normal move lowers your opponent's speed. You don't need to worry about lowering your opponent's speed whenever you're slow as dicks anyway, so it's really, really amazing because you're more likely going to be doing this. You're more likely going to be doing something like this. Maybe, well, maybe it's this. And then like this. So you don't need to worry about outspeeding shit anyway. And with Gluttony, while you're attacking, okay, you're using 2 moves at once. You're using Body Slam and Recycle. This thing is going to be so good. This thing, Snorlax, Lapras, I think anything that uses 2 moves at once is going to be phenomenal. So like Alchemy, I think is going to be really good. Copperajah is going to be really good because it sets up hazards and it goes for an attacking move. Corviknight's going to be really good because it gets rid of hazards and goes for an offensive move. Dreadnought is going to be really good. I think Grimmsnarl because it can put something to sleep while attacking. I already said Lapras and Snorlax. So I think that there's like, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4. Probably be easier if I did this. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 minus 2 for the 2 Gigantamax forms that are not released. You have 24 of them. That means you can have a 16-team league and everybody get a Gigantamax form. It's a mega slot. I think that this is how you make league format Gigantamax forms work, and I think it is absolutely amazing. Super excited for it. This is the one that I want to draft the most. I think it is going to be so freaking cool to draft like really offensively around this thing and have this be like the bulky pivot, because like at level 100 this thing also almost hits 1000 HP. Super, 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 super cool. Super excited for it. These two are like top of my list, but I hope you guys did enjoy it. Please try out Gigantamax in your league format this way. Before you just auto ban stuff, give it a try. If you try things, you can at least say you tried it and it didn't work. And that is something that I think that everybody needs to do in their leagues. But like, try it on Wi-Fi. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Big deal. You had fun doing it, and that's what matters. So try out Gigantamax, try out Wi-Fi, just try it. I promise you guys, you will enjoy it. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. Thank you all so much for watching and hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.